Ladies and gentlemen, in today's world, trust has become a commodity, often given away too easily without careful consideration. We live in a time where more than ever we are encouraged to open up, to trust, and to give others access to our deepest selves. But what happens when trust is misplaced? What happens when the very act of trusting others leads to the loss of who you are? Let's begin by acknowledging a simple truth. Self-awareness is key. Before you trust anyone, you must first understand who you are. Your values, your beliefs, and your goals must be clearly defined. Without this clarity, it's easy to lose yourself in the expectations and desires of others. You may find yourself doing things that don't align with your principles, all for the sake of pleasing someone else. Boundaries are crucial in protecting who you are. When you allow others to cross your boundaries without resistance, you open yourself to harm. Healthy relationships are built on respect, not on the invasion of personal space or identity. Trust should not mean surrendering your peace of mind or well-being. Now, trust is not something that should be freely given. It must be earned. In a world where personal interests often come before collective good, you need discernment. Ask yourself, is this person acting out of genuine care, or is there an agenda behind their actions? You must be cautious because blind trust can often lead to disappointment and betrayal. Above all, remember that the first person you should trust is yourself. If you don't trust your own instincts, your own decisions, how can you expect anyone else to? Trust begins within. Once you trust your ability to judge situations, people, and opportunities, your decisions will be more grounded and you will be less vulnerable to manipulation. It is also important to understand that people change, but your principles should not. When you allow others to dictate your beliefs or make decisions for you, you lose control over your life. Don't let external influence strip you of your sense of self. Stay true to your values, no matter the pressures around you. It's vital not to become too dependent on others. While it's wonderful to have relationships built on trust, you should never lose your independence. Relying on others too much can hinder your growth and in some cases can lead to emotional exploitation. In today's world where people may not always have your best interest at heart, being true to yourself is more important than ever. Trust should never come at the expense of losing who you are. You should never have to compromise your identity for the sake of fitting in or maintaining a relationship. Understand this: there is a fine line between trust and manipulation. While trust is about mutual respect, manipulation is about control. You must learn to discern the difference. If someone's actions make you feel less than who you are, then it's not trust, it's manipulation. Trust wisely, trust carefully, but most importantly, trust yourself first. Life is about balance. Don't let the need to trust others turn into a tool that causes you to lose yourself. Discernment is your greatest power. Use it to navigate the relationships and experiences in your life and protect the most valuable thing you have, your true self. In a world that constantly pushes for connection, intimacy, and open relationships, it's easy to forget the importance of self-awareness. We live in an era where we are encouraged to trust others with our thoughts, emotions, and lives, often without considering the cost. We are told to be open, vulnerable, and transparent with others. While these can be positive traits in fostering genuine relationships, the act of trusting others too freely can often lead us to lose touch with who we are. Understanding oneself is the foundation upon which all meaningful connections should be built. Before you allow anyone into your life, before you trust someone with your energy and time, you must first know who you are. Self-awareness is a process that requires introspection. It is the practice of reflecting on your core values, your needs, your desires, and your boundaries. If you do not understand what truly matters to you or what you will and will not tolerate, how can you expect to make decisions that protect your well-being? Trust should never be granted blindly. It should be a conscious decision based on an understanding of your own identity. If you're not clear about who you are, if you haven't spent time cultivating your own sense of purpose, trust becomes a dangerous game. You could be led down a path that compromises your principles, and before you know it, you might find yourself acting in ways that contradict your authentic self. You may make decisions that leave you feeling lost, confused, and disconnected from your own values. We must also recognize that boundaries are an essential part of preserving self-awareness and integrity. It's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that true connection means giving others unfettered access to your heart and mind. However, that often leads to emotional exhaustion and worse, manipulation. Healthy boundaries are not walls. They are guardrails that protect our peace of mind, our emotional health, and our ability to maintain our sense of self. Without these boundaries, trust becomes a tool that others can use to take advantage of us. When you set clear limits on what you are willing to share, how much of yourself you are willing to give, and what behaviors you will accept from others, you are safeguarding your inner peace. Trust should never be given away lightly. It should be earned, not assumed. In a society where people are constantly in motion, each with their own agendas, not everyone is worthy of your trust. It's not about being cynical or jaded. It's about being wise and discerning. Trusting someone simply because they asked for it or because they present themselves as trustworthy is risky. People are complex, and their intentions are often not as transparent as they may appear. Cultivating discernment, an ability to evaluate a person's actions, words, and past behaviors, allows you to make informed decisions about who deserves your trust. Trusting others requires an assessment of their values, reliability, and integrity. When you blindly trust without considering these factors, you open yourself up to potential disappointment or even betrayal. Learning how to read between the lines, to listen to your gut, and to notice when something doesn't feel right is a skill that will protect you. It is essential to remember that trusting others begins with trusting yourself. Self-trust is the foundation upon which all other trust is built. If you do not trust your instincts, how can you expect others to respect your boundaries and your well-being? Trusting yourself means understanding your needs, desires, and limits. It means listening to that inner voice that warns you when something feels off or when someone's behavior doesn't align with your values. It's easy to look to others for validation or approval, but true self-consciousness comes from knowing that you can make decisions based on your own inner guidance. When you trust yourself, you are not swayed by external influences, and you are not at the mercy of others' opinions. You are confident in your ability to choose the right people to trust and to recognize when trust is being betrayed. Blindly trusting others without first considering whether they have earned that trust can lead to painful consequences. It can result in feelings of betrayal, disillusionment, and hurt. Once trust is broken, it is difficult to rebuild, and the emotional toll can be long-lasting. Trust should not mean surrendering your autonomy or your principles for the sake of another person's comfort or desires. It is a delicate balance between giving and receiving, between vulnerability and self-preservation. When you give too much of yourself without protection, you risk losing sight of who you are. Your identity becomes entangled with someone else's, and before you know it, you may find yourself acting in ways that are out of character. You may start compromising your own values to fit into someone else's vision of who you should be. This is the danger of losing yourself through blind trust. People change over time, and as they do, their ability to maintain the trust you've given them may also shift. It's important to recognize that while others may change, your principles should remain constant. Trusting someone should never mean sacrificing your core beliefs or compromising on what matters most to you. Your values should act as the compass that guides your decisions, and they should not be swayed by others. If you allow others to redefine your values or to push you into actions that contradict your beliefs, you lose your sense of self. This is the danger of blind trust. It can lead you to adopt behaviors or make decisions that are completely out of alignment with your true self. It's important to recognize that overdependence on others for validation or emotional support can hinder your growth. While it is natural to seek companionship and affection, your emotional well-being should not be entirely dependent on the approval or validation of others. If you trust others too much, you may begin to lose your own sense of independence and self-reliance. You may begin to place more importance on what others think of you than on what you think of yourself. This dependency can limit your ability to grow and evolve as an individual. Trusting others should enhance your life, not diminish it. Healthy trust is built upon mutual respect and understanding, not on control or manipulation. When you trust yourself first, you become less dependent on the validation of others and more capable of making decisions that reflect your true self. Trust is a gift that must be given thoughtfully. It should never cost you your sense of identity. By staying grounded in who you are, understanding your boundaries, and trusting your instincts, you can navigate relationships in a way that enriches your life without sacrificing your true self. Trust wisely, and always remember that the most important person to trust is yourself. Trust is an essential component of every relationship, whether personal or professional. It is the foundation upon which the strongest connections are built, and yet it can also be the source of great disappointment and betrayal if not handled carefully. In today's world, the concept of trust has become more complex, especially when we realize that trusting others too freely can often lead to the loss of our own sense of self. We are living in an age where personal boundaries are often overlooked, and trust is frequently given without the careful consideration it deserves. The importance of boundaries in any relationship cannot be overstated. Boundaries are what protect our emotional and psychological well-being. Without them, we become vulnerable to manipulation, exploitation, and emotional burnout. In the context of trust, boundaries serve as a safeguard, ensuring that trust does not lead to the loss of our identity. It's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that true trust means being open and giving people unfettered access to our thoughts, emotions, and lives. But this type of trust often leads to unbalanced relationships where one party may take more than they give. In the absence of boundaries, we risk compromising our values and allowing others to shape us in ways that are not aligned with who we truly are. Boundaries are not walls that isolate us from the world around us. Instead, they are healthy lines that define where our responsibilities begin and end, and where others' responsibilities start. For example, when you allow someone to influence or dictate your emotions, thoughts, and actions, you risk losing your sense of self. Your peace of mind, emotional health, and well-being are all contingent on having clear boundaries that protect your personal space. Boundaries don't just protect us from others. They also teach us how to protect ourselves from our own impulses and desires. They help us navigate complex relationships by ensuring that our needs are respected and that our emotional energy is not drained by people who do not have our best interests at heart. Without proper boundaries, trust can easily turn into a form of self-sacrifice. This can happen in both personal and professional relationships when we give too much of ourselves without ensuring that our emotional reserves are being replenished. When trust is given without limits, it can lead to manipulation. Manipulation occurs when someone uses your trust against you for personal gain, and this can leave you feeling used, depleted, and emotionally vulnerable. In these situations, you may feel compelled to keep giving in order to maintain the relationship, even if it means compromising your own needs and desires. Over time, this dynamic can erode your self-worth and sense of identity. You may begin to question whether your value is defined by how much you are willing to give or how much others are willing to take from you. This is why it is so important to set boundaries in every relationship so that trust doesn't become an opportunity for others to take advantage of you. Setting boundaries is not about closing yourself off from the world or becoming distrustful. It is about knowing when to say no, when to walk away, and when to protect your peace. It is about recognizing that your time, energy, and emotions are precious resources that should not be taken lightly. By setting clear boundaries, you communicate to others that you value yourself and expect the same in return. You don't allow anyone to take more than they give, and you ensure that trust is a mutual exchange. Setting boundaries also requires discernment, which is the ability to distinguish between those who are worthy of your trust and those who are not. Not everyone deserves your trust, and it is essential to be able to evaluate people's actions and intentions before giving them access to your inner world. Discernment means looking beyond the surface and understanding a person's character. It requires being able to read between the lines and recognizing when someone's actions don't align with their words. Trust should be earned, not given freely. When you discern that someone's intentions are not genuine, you protect yourself by maintaining a healthy distance. This allows you to preserve your sense of self and avoid the emotional turmoil that comes with misplaced trust. One of the most common mistakes people make is blindly trusting others without considering their past behaviors or current motivations. People can be charming, persuasive, and appear to have your best interests at heart. However, appearances can be deceiving. Trusting someone solely based on their charisma or external appeal can lead to disappointment when their true intentions are revealed. Blind trust can leave you vulnerable to emotional manipulation, betrayal, and disappointment. This is why it is crucial to develop the ability to assess people's behavior and track record over time. The more you observe someone's actions, the clearer you become about whether they deserve your trust. It's not about being cynical or suspicious. It's about being wise and careful with your emotional energy. It is also important to recognize that trusting yourself first is the key to protecting your identity and maintaining a sense of self. If you don't trust your own judgment, your own instincts, or your own values, you will be swayed by external influences that may lead you down the wrong path. Trusting yourself means believing in your ability to make sound decisions, to recognize when something doesn't feel right, and to take action to protect yourself when needed. When you trust your own instincts, you become more resilient to manipulation and less likely to lose yourself in the process of trusting others. You begin to realize that you are not dependent on others for validation or emotional security. Your sense of self-worth is no longer tied to how others perceive you, but to how you perceive yourself. People change, and as they do, so too can their ability to be trustworthy. While people may have good intentions at the beginning of a relationship, circumstances can shift and they may no longer be able or willing to meet the expectations of the trust you've placed in them. This is why it's important to recognize that your values should remain constant, even if the people around you change. Trusting someone should never mean compromising your core beliefs or principles. Your values are what define you, and if someone pressures you to abandon them for the sake of the relationship, you risk losing yourself in the process. When you trust others at the cost of your own principles, you are essentially giving up your identity in favor of their desires. This is the danger of blind trust. It forces you to conform to someone else's vision of who you should be rather than allowing you to remain true to your authentic self. It is essential to recognize the dangers of over-dependence on others for emotional validation or support. While trust is necessary in relationships, it should never be the sole source of your emotional well-being. If you rely too heavily on others for your happiness or sense of worth, you will find yourself losing your independence and self-reliance. True self-consciousness comes from within, not from external sources. When you trust yourself and develop a strong sense of identity, you no longer need to seek constant approval or validation from others. You become more capable of making decisions that align with your true values and less likely to lose yourself in the process of trusting others. Trust is essential, but it must be given wisely. When trust becomes a tool for others to manipulate or control you, it leads to the loss of your identity. By setting healthy boundaries, practicing discernment, and trusting yourself first, you can navigate relationships in a way that protects your sense of self and ensures that your trust is a gift, not a liability. Trust wisely, and always remember that the most important person to trust is yourself. Trust is a powerful force that shapes the dynamics of every relationship, be it personal, professional, or casual. It can bring people closer together, fostering deep connections, mutual respect, and cooperation. Yet when trust is extended without thought or caution, it can easily lead to emotional turmoil, betrayal, and the erosion of one's sense of self. To trust people these days means to open oneself to the possibility of losing control over one's emotional and psychological well-being. The impact of misplaced trust is often not immediate, but it slowly chips away at your identity, your values, and your sense of autonomy. In the modern world, we are constantly encouraged to be open, to share, and to trust. Social media platforms, dating apps, and even professional networks encourage us to reveal our lives to others. While sharing can build relationships, it can also expose us to emotional manipulation, exploitation, and even deception. Trusting too easily is a mistake many people make, believing that it's essential for connection or that the people they trust have their best interests at heart. However, in reality, trusting people without properly assessing their intentions and behaviors can leave you vulnerable to being hurt. To trust people blindly is to give away part of your emotional sovereignty. When trust is given without boundaries, it invites others to manipulate, control, and possibly exploit you. The most dangerous part of this is that it often happens without us even realizing it. We may think we are forming authentic, genuine connections, but in reality, we may be compromising our sense of self for the sake of fitting into another person's narrative or fulfilling their desires. We trust that others have the same respect for our feelings, boundaries, and identity as we do, but not everyone shares the same level of emotional intelligence or integrity. Without proper discernment, we can end up in relationships where our needs are neglected, our values are disregarded, and we begin to lose sight of who we are and what we stand for. The danger of losing yourself through trust lies in the fact that it is often a gradual process. At first, small compromises seem insignificant. We might adjust our behavior to please someone else or overlook their red flags in the name of connection. But over time, these seemingly insignificant changes accumulate, and we start to lose the very essence of who we are. Our beliefs, preferences, and values begin to shift because we have allowed someone else to dictate them, whether consciously or unconsciously. The more we give in to someone else's demands or desires, the more we lose touch with our own voice. We begin to act in ways that don't feel authentic, but that we think will make others happy or keep the peace. This can erode our self-esteem and leave us questioning whether we are still the person we once were. Self-awareness is key to protecting yourself from losing yourself in a relationship or friendship. When we are aware of our own needs, desires, values, and boundaries, we are better equipped to determine when trust is appropriate and when it's being exploited. It's crucial to be grounded in who you are and what you stand for before placing your trust in others. If you do not know yourself, you risk allowing someone else to define you. Trust must be reciprocal and respectful, and it should never come at the cost of your own identity. The process of getting to know yourself, of cultivating self-awareness, allows you to navigate relationships from a place of strength and confidence rather than fear or dependency. Others' boundaries play an essential role in maintaining one's identity in the face of trust. Boundaries are the invisible lines we draw to protect our emotional, physical, and mental well-being. They ensure that while we may open up to others, we do not allow them to cross into areas of our lives that we are not comfortable with. A healthy boundary says, I am willing to trust you, but I will not compromise my core values, my self-respect, or my emotional health in the process. Without clear boundaries, it is easy to become enmeshed with others, losing sight of who we are in the process. People who have weak or unclear boundaries often find themselves giving too much of themselves, emotionally, mentally, and sometimes even physically, in an attempt to please others or maintain a connection. When trust is given without boundaries, it can lead to burnout, resentment, and a gradual erosion of self-worth. Trust, when given blindly, can become a trap. The expectation that people should trust others easily can make individuals vulnerable to manipulation, deceit, and emotional control. Manipulators often prey on people's desire for connection, exploiting their need to feel seen, heard, and valued. These individuals know how to present themselves in ways that make others believe they can be trusted, only to later take advantage of their trust for personal gain. This is especially true in relationships where one person holds power over the other, whether through emotional leverage, manipulation, or other means. When you trust someone who does not have your best interests at heart, you open yourself to the possibility of emotional harm. The loss of trust, especially when it involves a betrayal, can lead to deep feelings of hurt and disillusionment, which can take a long time to heal from. It is not only manipulative people who can cause harm through trust. Sometimes, even well-meaning individuals can cause damage when they are unaware of their own limitations or fail to respect boundaries. In these cases, the harm is less about malicious intent and more about a lack of emotional maturity or self-awareness. People may unintentionally take advantage of your trust or disregard your needs because they are focused on their own desires or lack the ability to see things from your perspective. In such situations, the responsibility lies not just with the person who misuses your trust, but also with you for not being aware of your own needs, values, and boundaries. When we trust others without first understanding how much we are willing to give or how much we can protect ourselves, we put ourselves at risk of losing our own identity in the process. The key to maintaining your sense of self while trusting others lies in learning how to trust wisely. Trust should be based on mutual respect, understanding, and reciprocity. It is essential to assess the trustworthiness of others before giving them access to your emotional life. Building trust should be a gradual process where both parties show consistency, integrity, and mutual care over time. Trust should be earned, not freely given. When you trust someone, it should be because they have proven themselves to be worthy of your trust, not simply because they ask for it. In this way, trust becomes a choice, a conscious decision based on an understanding of both yourself and the other person. Trust is not about giving up control or surrendering your sense of self. It's about finding balance between openness and self-preservation. It's about knowing when to trust others and when to trust yourself. When trust is given in the right context, it can strengthen relationships and bring people closer. But when trust is given blindly, without consideration for your own needs and boundaries, it can result in the loss of your identity and emotional well-being. The key is to cultivate self-awareness, set healthy boundaries, and ensure that any trust you give is earned and respected. Only then can trust truly become a tool for connection rather than a source of vulnerability. Trust is a cornerstone of any meaningful relationship, and yet in today's world, placing trust in others can sometimes feel like a gamble, especially when we live in a time when deception, manipulation, and betrayal are increasingly common. To trust people in this day and age means to risk losing yourself in the process. The act of placing trust in another is vulnerable and, when misplaced, can lead to emotional harm, confusion, and the erosion of one's self-identity. Trust, when given without boundaries or discernment, can leave you exposed to individuals who may not have your best interests at heart, causing you to lose touch with your values, needs, and overall well-being. Trust is a fragile thing, and once broken, it is incredibly difficult to rebuild. The decision to trust someone is often made in the hope of fostering a deeper connection, mutual respect, and understanding. However, what happens when that trust is betrayed or used against you? In these instances, trust not only becomes a source of pain, but also a catalyst for losing yourself. This is especially true when the trust you give is not reciprocated or is taken for granted. In many cases, people invest trust in others because they want to believe the best in them, or because they feel pressured to open up in a world that increasingly values openness and vulnerability. Unfortunately, in doing so, they may find themselves entrapped by someone else's agenda, whether it be emotional manipulation, selfish motives, or a lack of understanding of their needs. What often happens when we trust others without considering the potential consequences is that we lose sight of who we are. Trust, when given too freely, invites others into our lives and hearts, sometimes to the point of overexposure. When you trust someone, you might begin to share your deepest thoughts, your weaknesses, your hopes, and your dreams. However, if that trust is taken advantage of, these vulnerable parts of yourself can be used against you. You may begin to doubt your instincts, your ability to make decisions, and even your worth. The very act of trusting someone can chip away at your sense of self, because in the process you can become more focused on meeting their needs and validating their desires than on nurturing your own emotional health and well-being. The risk of losing yourself when you trust others is particularly evident in relationships where emotional dependency starts to form. In these situations, people may become so invested in their connection to someone else that they begin to neglect their own needs, preferences, and values. The relationship may become imbalanced, with one person dictating the terms and the other adjusting or compromising themselves to meet those demands. Over time, this dynamic can erode your self-respect and sense of individuality. What began as a simple desire to connect with another person can quickly turn into a situation where you find yourself losing your identity because you are no longer living in accordance with your true self. Placing too much trust in others can prevent you from seeing the warning signs that someone may not have your best interests at heart. People often hide their true intentions behind a facade of kindness or affection, and because we want to believe the best in others, we may overlook the subtle cues that indicate betrayal, manipulation, or lack of respect. In trusting blindly, we open ourselves up to being taken advantage of. We give up our ability to protect ourselves, trusting that others will honor our vulnerabilities, when in reality they may use them against us. This process of emotional exposure can be devastating, as it forces you to confront the reality that your trust has been misplaced. And in the aftermath, it can feel like a significant part of who you are has been taken from you. The concept of emotional boundaries becomes crucial in protecting yourself from the negative consequences of misplaced trust. Boundaries are the emotional, mental, and physical limits that you set to protect your emotional well-being. Without boundaries, it's all too easy to become enmeshed in relationships that are not healthy or sustainable. When boundaries are weak or non-existent, you risk becoming too involved in someone else's world and losing touch with your own. The idea of emotional detachment is not about closing yourself off from others, but rather about maintaining a sense of autonomy while still being open to connection. It's about learning when to protect yourself and when to engage with others. Boundaries ensure that trust doesn't become an overwhelming force that compromises your sense of self. One of the challenges of navigating trust in modern relationships is that society often pressures us to trust others as a sign of openness, vulnerability, and emotional maturity. The idea of being guarded is sometimes seen as a weakness or a defense mechanism, when in reality it can be a sign of wisdom. Knowing when to trust and when to be cautious is a skill that must be cultivated over time. It requires you to be in tune with your feelings, your intuition, and your own personal values. Trust is not something that should be freely given, it must be earned. When trust is based on the demonstration of consistent integrity, care, and respect, it can build a solid foundation for a relationship. However, if trust is offered without these assurances, it can lead to feelings of disillusionment and the eventual loss of your true self. Being discerning about who you trust, it is essential to maintain a strong sense of self-awareness. Self-awareness allows you to recognize when you are beginning to lose yourself in a relationship. It helps you to detect when you are compromising too much, when you are neglecting your own needs for the sake of someone else, or when you are ignoring warning signs that the person you trust may not have your best interests in mind. Trust, when combined with self-awareness, can become a tool for building healthy, mutually beneficial relationships. However, when trust is offered without the lens of self-awareness, it can lead to the opposite effect, creating relationships that are unbalanced, emotionally draining, and ultimately damaging to your sense of self. To trust people these days means to open yourself up to the risk of losing yourself in the process. The key to avoiding this pitfall is to practice discernment, to establish healthy emotional boundaries, and to cultivate self-awareness. Trust is a powerful force when used wisely, but when extended recklessly or without consideration for your own needs and values, it can become a tool of emotional harm. It's important to remember that trust is not a given, it must be earned and maintained through mutual respect and understanding. By protecting your emotional boundaries and being mindful of your own needs, you can navigate relationships in a way that fosters connection without sacrificing your sense of self. In this way, trust can be a source of strength, not a path to self-loathing. In a world that increasingly values openness and connection, trust has become a currency of sorts in relationships, friendships, and even in professional settings. Trusting others is often viewed as a virtue, a sign of emotional maturity, and an essential ingredient for any meaningful connection. However, in the complexity of modern life, placing too much trust in others can lead to a loss of personal identity, emotional instability, and vulnerability to exploitation. Trust, while necessary, can sometimes have unintended consequences, especially when we trust the wrong people or place too much faith in those who are not deserving of it. Trust is a foundational element of human interaction, and we are taught from a young age to believe that trust is vital for forming healthy, strong relationships. Whether it's a friendship, family relationship, or romantic involvement, trust serves as the bridge that connects us to others emotionally. However, as we mature and experience more of life's challenges, we begin to realize that trust is not something to be extended without caution. The belief that to trust is to live with an open heart can be misleading, especially in a world where deceit and manipulation are becoming increasingly prevalent. The truth is, trusting others too easily can result in the slow erosion of your sense of self. When we trust, we essentially expose ourselves. We offer up our vulnerabilities, our hopes, our dreams, and our feelings. In healthy relationships, this is met with respect, understanding, and reciprocation. But when trust is placed in someone who does not value or respect it, the consequences can be far-reaching. Over time, those who exploit our trust can chip away at our self-esteem, our boundaries, and even our sense of identity. People who do not genuinely care for our well-being can use our trust as a tool to manipulate, control, or dominate us. What started as an innocent act of opening up to someone else can soon turn into a situation where we are emotionally drained, confused, and disconnected from who we are. The risk of losing oneself in the act of trusting others comes from the very nature of trust itself. To trust someone is to allow them access to your inner world, your emotions, your vulnerabilities, and your thoughts. However, when that trust is misplaced, it allows others to invade this world without consideration for your emotional needs or boundaries. The person you trust may not respect your vulnerabilities and could manipulate them for their benefit. When you trust someone who does not honor your boundaries or values, you might start to lose touch with your own beliefs and preferences in order to meet their expectations. In doing so, you begin to give up pieces of yourself, your values, your priorities, your sense of autonomy, in the pursuit of maintaining the trust you've extended. This process can gradually erode your self-awareness, leaving you feeling lost and disconnected. The most insidious aspect of this loss of self is how it happens gradually. Initially, the compromises may seem small. You may start adjusting your behavior, opinions, or priorities to accommodate the other person, thinking that it's a minor concession in the name of trust. But as time goes on, these small adjustments accumulate. You find yourself bending further and further out of alignment with your true self. Your desires become secondary, your boundaries blurred, and your beliefs may start to shift based on the influence of others. You might find yourself questioning your own thoughts simply because the person you trusted has led you to believe their perspective is more valid than your own. Over time, you may even begin to forget who you were before you allowed someone else so much control over your emotions and decisions. This gradual erosion of self often happens in situations where there is an imbalance of power or where emotional dependence starts to take root. For example, in romantic relationships, one partner might take advantage of the trust and emotional dependence of the other. They may begin to control or manipulate their partner by using emotional tactics, creating a dynamic in which the person being manipulated becomes so absorbed in the other's world that they lose sight of their own needs and desires. In such cases, trusting another person becomes a path to emotional entrapment, where one's sense of self gets lost in the shadow of the other person's influence. Similarly, in friendships or even family relationships, people can take advantage of the trust given to them, pushing the boundaries of what is acceptable. Friends or family members might expect more from you than you are willing to give, and because you have trusted them, you may feel obligated to comply. These relationships may cause you to act against your own interests and values in order to preserve the relationship or avoid conflict. Over time, this type of trust can result in a loss of autonomy, where you no longer make decisions for yourself, but instead act based on what others expect of you. The loss of self through misplaced trust can also occur in professional environments, where colleagues or superiors may use your trust to manipulate your actions or force you into situations that undermine your values or personal boundaries. In work environments, trust is often expected as a way to foster collaboration and teamwork. However, when trust is not reciprocated, or when others exploit your willingness to cooperate, it can lead to burnout, resentment, and confusion. You may start to question your own abilities or feel like you are losing your sense of purpose because your professional identity is shaped by the demands and expectations of others rather than by your own vision and values. The key to protecting yourself from the dangers of losing yourself through trust lies in maintaining self-awareness and setting healthy boundaries. Self-awareness is the foundation upon which we can build healthy relationships. It allows you to recognize when your trust is being misused and when you are beginning to lose sight of your own needs and desires. With self-awareness, you can identify red flags, understand your own limitations, and make better choices about who to trust and when to trust them. Setting boundaries is equally important in this process. Boundaries act as a safeguard, protecting your emotional, mental, and physical well-being. They ensure that you do not lose yourself in the process of trusting someone else. Healthy boundaries mean that you can trust others without sacrificing your identity, your values, or your emotional health. When trust is placed wisely, it can strengthen relationships and foster deeper connections. However, when trust is given recklessly or without consideration of your own needs and boundaries, it can become a source of emotional harm and self-loss. Trust should be built gradually and must be earned. It is essential to assess whether the person you are trusting truly deserves your faith, whether they demonstrate respect, integrity, and consistency over time. If these qualities are lacking, it's important to recognize that offering trust may not be in your best interests. Trusting others in today's world requires discernment, self-awareness, and the courage to protect yourself emotionally. Trust should never come at the cost of your own identity. It is essential to maintain your sense of self and to protect your emotional well-being while still being open to meaningful connections with others. Trust is a gift, not a given, and it should be treated as such. In learning to trust wisely, you can create relationships that nurture your growth, support your well-being, and help you remain grounded in who you are, rather than losing yourself in the process. Trust is a powerful and transformative force in our lives. It is the foundation upon which we build relationships, friendships, and even our professional connections. However, in the complexity of the modern world, trusting others can sometimes feel like an open invitation for disappointment, heartache, and in some cases, a loss of self. The notion that trusting others means losing oneself may sound extreme, but when you reflect on the emotional toll that misplaced trust can have, it becomes evident that giving your trust to the wrong person or doing so without boundaries can erode your sense of identity and self-worth. The pain caused by betrayal or manipulation can take a long time to heal, and in many cases, the scars left behind are reminders of how trust can be exploited, ultimately leaving you feeling disconnected from who you truly are. The very act of trusting someone requires a level of vulnerability. We trust because we want to believe that others are good, honest, and worthy of our confidence. Trusting is an act of faith in the goodness of others, and it often stems from a desire for connection, understanding, and shared experiences. In close relationships, trust is integral. It allows us to be ourselves, to open up, and to grow together with someone else. But when that trust is violated, the emotional consequences can be devastating. The pain of betrayal goes beyond the broken trust itself. It often results in a crisis of identity where you start to question who you are and whether your judgment is flawed. The very foundation upon which you've built your sense of security and connection is shattered, and in its place, a sense of confusion and loss begins to take over. One of the most profound effects of misplaced trust is the gradual erosion of your sense of self. When you trust others too easily, or when you place too much faith in someone without understanding their intentions, you may begin to prioritize their needs, opinions, and desires over your own. Over time, this can lead to an imbalance in the relationship where you lose touch with what you need and desire. Instead of making decisions based on your values and instincts, you start to make choices based on what others expect or want from you. Your desires and opinions become secondary, and your sense of autonomy diminishes. You may find yourself becoming a reflection of the other person, trying to meet their expectations or fulfill their desires rather than standing firm in your own identity. In many cases, the loss of self that comes from misplaced trust is subtle. It doesn't happen overnight, but rather occurs gradually, often in small, seemingly insignificant ways. You might adjust your behavior slightly to accommodate someone else's preferences, or you might let go of something important to you in order to keep the peace. At first, these adjustments may seem harmless. After all, trusting someone often requires compromise. But over time, these compromises accumulate, and the person you once were, the person with strong boundaries, clear desires, and a strong sense of self, begins to fade into the background. You may find that you no longer recognize yourself, that you have become a person who is constantly trying to meet the needs and expectations of others without considering whether those needs align with your own values. Another factor that contributes to the loss of self when trust is misplaced is the emotional dependency that can develop in relationships where one person exerts control over the other. When trust is given without boundaries, it becomes easier for the other person to take control of the relationship and influence your thoughts, feelings, and actions. Emotional manipulation can be subtle, but over time, it can leave you feeling powerless and disconnected from your own emotional landscape. You may start to second-guess yourself, question your feelings, and even begin to doubt your ability to make decisions. This emotional dependency can cloud your judgment and make it difficult to recognize when you are being manipulated or when your own emotional needs are being ignored. The fear of losing yourself in a relationship or in a friendship can also stem from the pressure to be constantly available or responsive to others. In a society that often glorifies selflessness and constantly being there for others, it can be difficult to establish and maintain healthy boundaries. The more we trust others, the more we might feel obligated to be available to them at all times, to meet their needs and to accommodate their desires. This can quickly lead to burnout, resentment, and a sense of being overwhelmed as we neglect our own well-being in favor of others' needs. As we continue to give more of ourselves, we can lose sight of our own emotional health, our personal goals, and even our sense of individuality. Trust, when misplaced, can also lead to a profound sense of disillusionment. When you have trusted someone and they betray that trust, it can be difficult to reconcile the image you had of them with the reality of who they are. The disappointment and hurt that come with betrayal often leave you questioning your own judgment and whether you can ever truly trust anyone again. The emotional toll of such an experience can leave you feeling disconnected from others and from yourself. The trust that you once gave so freely now feels like a liability, and you may find it difficult to open up to others or to trust again in the future. This disillusionment can make you withdraw from relationships altogether, as the pain of betrayal overshadows the possibility of meaningful connections. One of the most challenging aspects of the loss of self through misplaced trust is the difficulty of regaining your sense of identity once it has been compromised. After you have given so much of yourself to others, it can be difficult to remember who you were before you trusted them. Your emotional landscape becomes entangled with theirs, and you may feel like you have lost the ability to make decisions independently. Regaining a sense of self after experiencing the loss of trust requires time, self-reflection, and a deliberate effort to reestablish boundaries and prioritize your own needs. It also involves learning to trust yourself again and to recognize that your emotions, desires, and values are just as important as those of others. While trusting others can be an essential part of life, it is important to remember that trust should not come at the cost of your own identity or emotional health. Trust must be given selectively and with discernment. It is important to recognize that not everyone deserves your trust, and not everyone will treat it with the respect it deserves. Establishing healthy boundaries, maintaining self-awareness, and trusting yourself are essential steps in ensuring that trust does not become a pathway to losing yourself. In doing so, you can protect your emotional well-being while still being open to meaningful, supportive, and respectful connections with others. Ultimately, trust should enhance your relationships, not diminish your sense of self. In today's world, the concept of trust has become increasingly complicated, particularly when it comes to trusting others in an emotionally vulnerable way. We are often told that trusting people is a key to developing strong relationships, and that in many instances, trust is the glue that holds us together. But trust, while powerful, also comes with the potential for serious emotional consequences when it is misused or misplaced. To trust people, especially in an environment where deceit and manipulation can be so prevalent, may mean that you lose yourself. When trust is given too freely or to the wrong people, the result can be a gradual loss of personal identity, emotional confusion, and a sense of being disconnected from who you truly are. Trust requires vulnerability. It involves opening yourself up to another person, allowing them to have access to your thoughts, feelings, and experiences. In healthy relationships, this vulnerability is met with respect, care, and a sense of mutual understanding. When you trust someone, you essentially place a piece of your emotional well-being in their hands. and you expect that they will handle it with kindness and consideration. However, when that trust is violated or abused, the consequences can be far-reaching. You are left with a sense of betrayal and an emotional wound that can take years to heal. In the worst cases, misplaced trust can lead to a loss of confidence in your own judgment and a disconnection from your true self. The impact of misplaced trust is not always immediate. It is often gradual and insidious. At first, trusting someone may seem like the right thing to do. You might tell yourself that they are worthy of your trust because they show care or because you share a bond of some sort. But over time, you begin to notice small shifts in the relationship. Perhaps your needs are not being acknowledged, or your boundaries are not respected. Maybe you begin to feel emotionally drained after spending time with this person, as if your energy and sense of self are being siphoned away. These signs can be easy to dismiss at first, but they are important indicators that your trust may be misplaced. The person you trusted might not be aware of the harm they are causing, or worse, they might be using your vulnerability to their advantage, taking more from you than they give in return. In these situations, trust becomes a tool for emotional manipulation. Instead of being a foundation for mutual respect and understanding, trust is used as a mechanism for control. The person you have trusted may begin to exert influence over your decisions, your feelings, and even your perceptions of reality. They may make subtle or not so subtle suggestions that cause you to doubt yourself, your choices, and your sense of what is right. You might find yourself changing your beliefs or adjusting your behavior to please them, even if doing so doesn't feel natural or true to who you are. The more you accommodate their desires, the more you lose touch with your own. The very act of trusting them in the first place has led you down a path where you are no longer making decisions for yourself, but rather letting someone else's opinions and desires dictate your action. In relationships, whether personal or professional, the most dangerous aspect of misplaced trust is the loss of autonomy. Trust is often accompanied by a certain degree of emotional dependence. You begin to rely on the other person for validation, support, or direction. This reliance can erode your sense of independence, making you less capable of thinking or acting for yourself. Instead of using your own judgment, you look to the other person to tell you what is right, what you should do, and how you should feel. Over time, you may start to feel like you are living for the other person rather than for yourself. Your decisions become influenced by their desires or their approval, and you may begin to prioritize their happiness or comfort over your own. This emotional dependence can also manifest in a fear of being without the person you trust. The thought of losing their approval or support can become a source of anxiety, leading you to continue trusting them, even when you feel uncomfortable or when they mistreat you. The longer this dynamic continues, the more difficult it becomes to break free because you have invested so much emotional energy in the relationship and in the trust you have given. In extreme cases, this can lead to a form of emotional enslavement, where your entire sense of self-worth is tied to the validation and acceptance of the other person. The loss of self that comes from misplaced trust can also be seen in how we change our behavior to fit the expectations of others. When trust is abused, you may find yourself altering your actions, speech, or demeanor to match what the other person wants or expects. You might start to suppress parts of yourself that you once considered vital or true to your identity because you fear rejection or disapproval. You may put aside your dreams, desires, or values to conform to the other person's agenda. In doing so, you lose touch with the very essence of who you are. Your identity becomes fragmented, and you begin to wonder if you have any real sense of self left. The act of pleasing others at the cost of your own well-being can be so ingrained that you forget what it feels like to act from a place of personal conviction and authenticity. But this erosion of self can also extend to your mental and emotional health. Trusting someone who manipulates or exploits that trust can cause you to feel confused, anxious, or insecure. You may begin to second-guess your decisions, your feelings, and even your intuition. You might feel like you can't trust your own judgment anymore because the other person has planted seeds of doubt in your mind. This can leave you feeling emotionally unstable, constantly questioning what is real and what is not. Over time, these feelings of confusion can turn into self-doubt, which only further weakens your ability to assert yourself and maintain healthy boundaries. The more you lose touch with your inner voice, the harder it becomes to recognize when you are being manipulated or mistreated. The painful truth is that trusting people in this way, without boundaries or careful consideration, can lead to a process of self-loss that is difficult to reverse. Once you have allowed someone to have that much influence over your emotions and decisions, it can be challenging to regain your sense of self. You might feel like you are starting from scratch, trying to rediscover who you were before you lost yourself in the other person's expectations and needs. The path to healing often requires introspection, boundary setting, and in some cases, distancing yourself from those who have taken advantage of your trust. This is not easy, as it involves confronting the reality that the relationships or individuals you trusted may not have had your best interests at heart. To protect yourself from losing yourself in the act of trusting others, it is important to cultivate self-awareness and emotional resilience. Establishing clear personal boundaries is crucial to maintaining a sense of identity and well-being. These boundaries act as a safeguard against emotional manipulation, ensuring that trust is earned rather than freely given. You must learn to recognize when your trust is being exploited and when it is time to step back and reassess the relationship. Trust should never come at the expense of your emotional health or your sense of self. It is a gift that should be given to those who demonstrate respect, honesty, and integrity. In conclusion, trust is a powerful tool for building meaningful relationships, but it must be handled with care. Trusting people too easily or without discernment can lead to a loss of self, emotional instability, and confusion. By maintaining strong boundaries, practicing self-awareness, and trusting yourself, you can protect your sense of identity and avoid the pitfalls of misplaced trust. True trust is reciprocal and built on respect. It should never cause you to lose yourself in the process. In a world where personal relationships, both professional and personal, play a central role in our well-being, there is a significant shift occurring in how we perceive trust. Trust is no longer a given in relationships. It has become something that needs to be earned, protected, and sometimes even withheld. Trusting people too freely or too quickly can lead to a gradual but significant loss of oneself. In many cases, trusting the wrong people can result in emotional manipulation, betrayal, and a disconnection from your true identity. The cost of trusting too deeply, especially in a society where deception is often prevalent, is the loss of your inner peace, self-worth, and autonomy. To trust others without caution or discernment can gradually cause you to lose touch with your core values, principles, and desires. Trust, when given to the right people, can be a powerful bond. It can create deeper connections, foster cooperation, and cultivate a sense of security. However, trust is a double-edged sword. To trust too easily or to place too much faith in someone who does not deserve it can lead to emotional vulnerability and ultimately manipulation. Once that trust is breached, it becomes difficult to regain. The emotional scars left by betrayal can take years to heal, and in the process, the very essence of who you are can become compromised. When we trust people, we give them a piece of ourselves. Trust is, in its most fundamental sense, an act of vulnerability. It is the willingness to expose our innermost thoughts, feelings, and desires to another person. This vulnerability is intended to foster closeness and intimacy, allowing for growth and a deeper connection. But when that trust is taken advantage of or abused, the consequences can be profound. You may feel betrayed, hurt, and unsure of who you are anymore. The loss of trust can be disorienting and destabilizing. It can leave you questioning your judgment, your instincts, and even your ability to trust yourself. One of the most insidious aspects of misplaced trust is the way it causes us to lose sight of our own needs, desires, and values. When we trust someone deeply, we may begin to prioritize their happiness or well-being over our own. We adjust our behavior to please them, even when it requires us to suppress our own beliefs or desires. Slowly, the person we trusted becomes the center of our emotional universe. Their happiness becomes our happiness, and their approval becomes our validation. Over time, this leads to an erosion of our own sense of self. We begin to define ourselves through their lens rather than through our own experiences and values. The more we cater to their needs, the less we pay attention to our own. This shift in focus from ourselves to others is a gradual process. Initially, we may feel that we are simply being considerate, caring, or accommodating. We may tell ourselves that this is what love or friendship requires. However, as we continue to suppress our own needs and desires, we begin to lose touch with what makes us unique and authentic. The more we rely on someone else's approval, the more disconnected we become from our true selves. This disconnection can lead to a sense of emptiness, as if we are no longer sure of who we are or what we stand for. The emotional consequences of trusting the wrong people are not always immediately apparent. They can take time to manifest, often showing up in subtle ways. You might find yourself feeling drained, confused, or anxious after spending time with certain individuals. You might begin to doubt your own decisions or feel uncertain about the relationships you have invested in. These feelings are not always easy to identify, but they are signals that something may be off. When trust is abused, it leads to an emotional imbalance. You may feel as though you are constantly giving without receiving in return, leaving you feeling depleted. Your needs may go unacknowledged and your boundaries may be disrespected. Over time, this imbalance takes a toll on your mental and emotional well-being. Perhaps one of the most damaging effects of misplaced trust is how it affects our ability to trust ourselves. When we place our faith in people who do not deserve it, we may find ourselves second-guessing our instincts and our judgment. We might start to question whether we misread the situation or misunderstood the person's intentions. The emotional confusion that arises from this can be paralyzing. We may begin to feel like we cannot trust our own feelings or perceptions. This self-doubt can be debilitating, making it difficult to make decisions, trust others, or even trust ourselves in the future. The longer we stay in relationships where our trust is abused, the harder it becomes to distinguish healthy trust from manipulation. There is also a deep psychological cost to constantly seeking validation from others. When trust is misplaced, we start to depend on others for our self-worth. We look to them for approval, affirmation, and reassurance. This external validation becomes the measure of our value. The more we seek approval from others, the more disconnected we become from our own inner voice. We may start to lose sight of what truly matters to us and begin to prioritize what others think over our own feelings. This can lead to a cycle of anxiety and insecurity. We worry about whether we are meeting others' expectations, whether they still care about us. or whether they still approve of us. This dependence on others for validation gradually erodes our self-confidence and sense of self-worth. Misplaced trust also leads to a sense of emotional dependency. We become attached to the person we trust, often to the point where we fear losing them. The thought of being alone or abandoned becomes overwhelming, and we may tolerate mistreatment or disrespect just to avoid the discomfort of separation. In these situations, we may lose our ability to set healthy boundaries. Instead of standing up for ourselves or asserting our needs, we may silence our own voices in order to maintain the relationship. Over time, this emotional dependence can become toxic, leading to a cycle of self-sacrifice and self-neglect. To avoid the pitfalls of misplaced trust, it is essential to cultivate a sense of self-awareness and emotional independence. Building self-trust is key to maintaining healthy boundaries and protecting your emotional well-being. It is important to recognize the signs that your trust is being abused and to take steps to protect yourself. Trust should never come at the expense of your identity, your values, or your peace of mind. Healthy relationships are based on mutual respect, honesty, and understanding. They allow both individuals to thrive while maintaining their sense of self. While trust is essential for building meaningful relationships, it is important to recognize the potential risks of trusting the wrong people. When trust is misplaced, it can lead to emotional manipulation, dependency, and a loss of self. To trust people without caution is to risk losing yourself in the process. By maintaining strong personal boundaries, practicing self-awareness, and trusting your instincts, you can protect yourself from the emotional harm caused by misplaced trust. Trust should be a gift, not a burden, and it should be given only to those who demonstrate respect, honesty, and integrity.